Doom is a venerable, long-running first-person shooter franchise created by id Software and released across a wide range of platforms. Following its 30th anniversary, I'm getting into the wider series for the first time and breaking down why the property has endured and left such a huge impact on the gaming industry. As always, the retrospective is broken down into chapters, which you can find in the description. A word of warning, the early Doom games feature some flashing lights and effects that could trigger epilepsy. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Back in 1991, four American programmers, John Carmack, his brother Adrian, Tom Hoare and John Romero, founded id Software and started to make games with their shared interest in computer hardware. Things started modestly enough with Commander Keen, a side-scrolling platformer, but it was 1992 that delivered the bigger effort. Wolfenstein 3D was the progenitor of what would eventually become the first-person shooter. Following its release, John Carmack started experimenting with new technology, an approach that became common for the developer. This formed the basis for their most well-known hit, Doom, a science fiction shooting game that built off an already well-established foundation. Releasing in December 1993 for DOS computer systems, Doom was a different kind of beast, marking a number of firsts for the gaming industry. This was the product that embraced the first-person perspective fully and set the rules for the genre. The title was action-packed, wildly entertaining, and also turned into a pop culture phenomenon, but that only scratches the surface of its impact. The game was pretty controversial at the time for its graphic violence and demonic imagery, which caused both parents and religious groups to condemn it in the early going. For this video, I'm playing the digital re-release developed by Nerve Software, which contains all the additional content and some community features. Beginning with the first of 3 episodes, Knee Deep in the Dead, we're thrown right into combat. In the not too distant future, your character is the Doom Guy, a gruff, tough-as-nails, no-nonsense space marine who appears to be the sole survivor of a demonic invasion on Mars. As with many video game narratives from the early 90s, the tone is very tongue-in-cheek, especially in the ending text for each episode. The developers worked in plenty of self-aware in-jokes, balancing out what would otherwise be a grim affair. Your objective is as simple as it gets. Fight your way out and take out as many of the ugly bastards as you can along the way. To do so, you'll make use of a fairly small but highly potent arsenal, which starts the same way Wolfenstein did, a dinky pistol and a melee attack with your fists. Placed in the centre of the screen, lining up and executing demons is straightforward, with the auto-aim targeting foes at high and low elevations as long as you can see them. The movement is fast and fluid, and with no need to reload, it's all about going on the offensive, though on occasion some circle strafing will be needed to overcome some of the stronger enemies. The demons you go up against are unique, diverse, and for the time distinctive in their appearances and attack patterns. This was another key component that made Doom so entertaining. At a time where many enemies simply fired faster or attacked from different directions in a 2D perspective, the developers gave each foe their own role to play in the action. You start off with the Zombie Man and Shotgun Guy, very low health and easy to kill, but their firearms will always hit you if you're in range and don't take them out. The imps, with their recognisable brown colouring and spikes, can launch fireballs at you from a distance and are the most common enemy. The pinkies, also known as demons, charge up and bite the Doom Guy, with their movements being faster and more erratic. The lost souls surprise the player by rushing towards them for a quick bit of damage. The Caca demons float around and take more damage, and finally the Barons of Hell serve as mini-bosses, launching their powerful energy blasts. These demons are gradually introduced, and by the time you start taking on multiple types at once, that's when the challenge really starts to ramp up. By giving every demon a unique look, sound and attack pattern, the player is able to recognise them instantly and quickly draw on the best approach to take them out. That could be said for every element of Doom's presentation, doing more with less. Even with the primitive graphics and flat models, the game still made an impression before the wider industry had fully entered the third dimension. There's a heavy use of red and orange to convey a hellish atmosphere, and the contrast between level geometry and the simple backplates is always well defined. Blood-soaked corpses of other marines litter the environment, with beating hearts and skulls often lining the hallways. The rocking soundtrack that kicks in as soon as you start playing was composed by Bobby Prince, who would also return for the sequel. The blend of heavy metal and techno would rise and fall across the levels, while also becoming a regular fixture throughout the series. Even back in 1993 on limited hardware, the main themes made every player want to unleash their firepower on the hordes. Luckily for the Doom guy, his toolkit scales up to 8 sci-fi guns with some very powerful functions. The shotgun will often be your weapon of choice, with plenty of ammo lying around and a reasonable amount of damage, though the pump action keeps you in check. The chain gun is a holdover from Wolfenstein, but in Doom the fast fire rate can prevent enemies from using their ranged attacks, allowing you to suppress multiple demons at once. Further down the line, the plasma gun is fully automatic and really tears through the weaker enemies. The little touches like having the weapon recoil upwards when you stop firing adds an extra dose of power. The rocket launcher feels very meaty with strong explosion effects that remain effective at range, though players needed to make sure they weren't too close to the blast radius. The two most exotic weapons are the chainsaw and the iconic BFG 9000. Slicing your enemies up with an industrial tool had rarely been seen in gaming, and it also offers benefits for players willing to rush the enemy and get up close and personal. As for the BFG, it was gaming's first wonder weapon, wiping out every demon in sight with an all-consuming blast. It's the ultimate embodiment of the Doom power fantasy. You'll certainly need these weapons, as on higher difficulties, Doom requires a great deal of coordination and knowledge of the levels to make it through. The enemy count increases dramatically, and so does the overall speed of play. When you couple that with the set number of health pickups, the gameplay becomes more tactical. Which route do you take through the winding corridors to do the most damage and lose the least amount of health? How can you stack up your health and ammo count for the boss enemies? The Cyber Demon and Spider Demon are both very imposing in their own ways when you reach their inner chambers. The former is a beefy tank that towers over the Doom guy, and the latter tracks you relentlessly with its autocannons. There are multiple ways to succeed. If you're skilled enough to carry your full toolkits to the last level, the bosses can be annihilated quickly. But if you died and lost them in previous encounters, you may need to take a cautious approach. Taking on the Spider Demon without a BFG involves edging around the sides of the arena and hitting him with rockets from a distance. The final pillar of Doom's design are the levels themselves, which also make great leaps forward from Wolfenstein 3D. You'll still be finding keys to open doors and uncovering a secret area or two, but this time around the dev team gave players an excellent map system that always lays out the important features while keeping the gameplay moving. The labyrinthian style is still present, but Doom also introduced many new features. Skull switches to control doors, elevators to ride up and down, and wide open spaces with plenty of room to maneuver. All of these elements would go on to become common fixtures when gaming entered the third dimension later on in the 90s. Exploding barrels made an early appearance, offering up a handy risk-reward system, and natural hazards like acid and lava pits force you to be careful, especially in later levels. This goes hand in hand with the temporary power-ups, which range from a visor upgrade to light up dark areas, and a radiation suit that allows the Doom guy to walk across hazardous pits without taking damage. We also have Berserk and Invincibility, which change the screen colour and allow you to decimate the opposition. Partial invisibility was the only item I didn't find much use for across the entire experience. It's more effective when the Pinky Demons use it against you, offering up a sudden surprise when you enter darker areas. What's interesting about these power-ups is how they change the dynamic and pace of the game, while also factoring in difficulty levels. A casual player on Not Too Rough can kick back and wipe out the demons to their heart's content, but on Ultraviolence or Nightmare, skilled players will time the pickups carefully to make it through an especially difficult fight or traversal section. Thanks to the simple addition of par times for each level, a new way to play was revealed: speedrunning. How fast can you race through each level? Can you do it while collecting 100% of all items and killing every enemy? How about doing it on the highest difficulty to really show off your skills? The community would return to Doom time and again to perfect their strategies. a hobby that is now widely common across almost every video game genre. The fourth bonus episode, Thy Flesh Consumed, was released as part of the Ultimate Doom compilation in 1995. As the name implies, this 9-level set is much more challenging than the first 3. Demons now teleport in, and their level of aggression is much higher than before. The levels are also more devious, with more pits of lava that can quickly whittle your health down if you aren't careful. From a story perspective, the Doom Guy returns to Earth and battles the forces sent through the portal by the Spider Demon. In this way, Episode 4 acts as a bridge between the original game and the follow-up. Even after this wider compilation came out, players still weren't done with the title, and this was accomplished through modding. In keeping with their love of programming, Doom's creators left the game's tools open for others to experiment with, and another branch of the community exploded. Modding is arguably the biggest extension to a game's lifespan, and a cornerstone of the PC platform. Countless creations were released on WAD files before the internet took off towards the turn of the millennium, with the developers themselves being very impressed with players converting Doom to Star Wars and other forms. If you couldn't tell already, Doom's mark on gaming was overwhelming. Over 6 million copies flew off the shelves by 1999, and the title continued to leap from system to system. The number of ports is easily the highest in the industry. Consoles, mobile devices, even a pregnancy test. Add to that the pioneering of multiplayer deathmatches, modding and speedrunning, and you start to understand why this little game from 1993 is still widely revered today. id Software quickly got started on the next entry. For the rest of the decade, many properties would take after Doom, often being labelled as clones in the process. The work done by id ensured that many companies were keen to jump into the FPS genre, most notably with titles like Star Wars Dark Forces and Duke Nukem 3D, which both utilised the same perspective and design templates. These games were very popular in their own right, but most eagerly awaited a follow-up to the 1993 original. Arriving just 1 year after its predecessor, Doom 2 went broader and wider, aiming to refine the existing formula. It was also the first entry to get a full physical release on the market. Development was mainly handled by Sandy Peterson and America McGee, though the other designers still had a role to play. Once again, the digital re-release on Steam was produced by Nerve Software, which is always available at a cheap price. Doom 2 is all about saving our home planet from the forces of hell who are running riots through industrial areas and cities. The invasion has brought new foes and tougher levels on top of the existing formula, which remains very similar to the first game. The Doom Guy continues to run around, gunning down every demon that gets in his way, before moving on to the next area. The controls, lack of a jump button and the gunplay remain exactly the same, but unlike modern shooters, this wasn't detrimental to the experience. With technology still being quite limited at the time, expectations for dramatic innovations were lower. With that said, the tools given to the player were almost identical to the first, with some being disappointed on release. The Super Shotgun is the lone new addition to the arsenal, a double-barreled beast that does far more damage than the regular version. We also get a new power-up called the Megasphere, which maxes out your health and armor to 200%, but that's about it on the player side. On the other hand, the enemy count is much higher. Not only does Doom 2 throw more demons at you early on, you'll also have to contend with many new foes. The Revenant is a vicious demon with rockets that home in on the player. The Mancubus is an ugly blob that fires twin cannons. The Arc Vial can light the Doom Guy on fire and resurrect other demons. The Arachnotron is a smaller but still deadly version of the Spider Demon, and the Heavy Machine Gunner puts a more dangerous spin on the Zombie Man and Shotgun Guy. Most of these new demons will need to be prioritised in combat, as they all deal higher amounts of damage. With only a 1 year gap, Doom 2 also continues its run on the id Tech 1 engine, with the same flat textured graphics placed against a wider range of backdrops. It all looks just as grisly and foreboding as it did before, with even more death animations for the new creatures. Conversely, the music feels a lot more understated and moody than the original, shifting away from the action-packed focus of its predecessor. The compositions from Bobby Print are still a good fit, but they lack a crunchy impact. As a result, I didn't find the tracks quite as memorable. Broadly, the Hell on Earth campaign can be split into 3 main sections across a total of 30 levels. These take place across industrial outposts, local cities, and finally Hell itself. There are brief text interludes between the sections, and you still have many offensive gauntlets to run through, but the sequel brings a distinct focus on brain teasers and more varied geometry. Door keys are now spread further apart and require more precise exploration to find. The radiation and lava pits are much more widespread, and some stages test your movement as well as your aim. The most infamous section is the Chasm, which features extremely narrow platforms that are very difficult to race through. Other levels like Downtown feature multiple skyscrapers with their own unique environmental puzzles. For Doom 2, this is the best form of progression. You've got the fanbase hooked in, now test their skills even more. This is especially true for speedrunners, who find themselves racing across narrow ledges to get to the end, on top of managing resources. After shooting through a much more vivid representation of Hell, the final boss of Doom 2 took some players by surprise. With every weapon and max ammo handed out, you drop into the arena and find a giant visage on the wall. This is the icon of Sin, the source of all demons that proceeds to spawn an unending legion. Rather than pump it full of bullets like you did previously, this boss has a weak point that can only be reached via the rising platform in the centre. Newer versions of Doom 2 added a crosshair to pinpoint the right moment to strike, but in the original you had to time your shots carefully with the rocket launcher to land a hit. This final boss is also remembered for a wacky Easter egg. When designing the level, Sandy Peterson jokingly inserted John Romero's head, which can be found behind the wall. When Romero found out about this secret, he joined in on the prank, recording distorted versions of his voice to add some extra character to the icon of Sin. After around 3 or 4 hits to the weak point, the doorway to Hell is closed forever, and Earth can finally rebuild. Though the community was satiated by Doom 2 The Master levels, which came out in 1995. These were produced by various authors, with some making use of familiar templates, and others leaning into more wacky scenarios. Express Elevator to Hell takes place in a single shaft with multiple doorways on the way down, and Bad Dream is truly insane, a room packed full of cyber demons. The direct approach is suicide, and you'll have to trick the demons into killing each other instead. Doom 2 may not have the industry-shaking impact of the original, but it's still a confident and capable sequel that delivers everything an FPS fan could ask for. It became the best-selling software product of 1994 in North America, emphasizing that the series held large weight among the wider community. The game would later be ported to the Game Boy Advance and digital distribution on consoles. It even received an expansion on Xbox Live, No Rest for the Living, a full 16 years after its release. Doom would head off on side tangents for the remainder of the 90s. The final Doom in 1996 boasted the toughest levels in the entire series up to that point. Then in 1997, Doom 64, developed by Midway under id supervision, marked a major graphical upgrade when compared to previous versions. 64 soon found a cult following, but Doom would not receive a third mainline entry until the mid-2000s. id Software was hard at work on their new game engine, and this would take their most prized IP in a different, rebooted direction. Doom had made its presence felt in the early to mid-90s, but its creators struck out in different directions. In between sequels, id Software would put out their third big-name FPS franchise, Quake, which would eventually become a smash hit in online gaming. Returning to Doom after an extended break, continuing on from Hell on Earth didn't make much sense. The industry had been moving forward quickly, with new juggernaut franchises like Half-Life, Halo, and Grand Theft Auto reaching major milestones. 3D gaming was now the guiding light for countless genres, and id knew they would have to keep up or be left behind. A long development process with multiple delays ensued, with an impressive alpha demo at E3 2002. The sequel was set to deliver an unprecedented level of graphical detail and finally arrived in late 2004. It received good reviews and became id's most successful product, selling over 3.5 million units. But over time, many fans of the franchise now look back on it unfavourably. Unlike the first 2 games, it isn't widely regarded as a classic, with many saying that it strayed too far from the formula. For this video, I got into the BFG Edition, produced by Vicarious Visions in 2012, which includes all extra content and a few added changes to the core action. Be warned, as Doom 3 features violent screen shaking as well as flashing lights if you get motion sickness. Starting again from scratch, Doom 3 ignores the events of the first 2 games. In every way imaginable, it is a major departure, starting with the ugly visage of the Hell Knight on the front cover. The game aspired to be many things, most notably the #1 most hardcore and brutal FPS game on store shelves. As you start the first level, it also aims to tell a more detailed story, opening in 2145 with the UAC Corporation conducting major mining and scientific operations on Mars. Your character is a blank and kind of dopey looking marine, tasked with guarding the base when a demonic invasion erupts. The nefarious experiments of Dr. Malcolm Betruger have opened the floodgates to hell, and now you have to put a stop to it. Of course, the first thing you notice are the graphics. Between 1994 and 2004, the franchise made a truly colossal jump in fidelity. This is felt most in the early going. Seeing all the visual upgrades to the enemies and levels makes for a solid first impression. At other points, Doom 3 really likes to show off the lighting and shadows, like this sequence where you follow a scientist through the pitch black corridors. That brings me to the biggest change in the BFG Edition, being able to switch your flashlight on while holding a weapon. In the original, the developers chose to make the flashlight its own item to emphasize the dark corners and scarier elements, but some players complained that it made navigation and spotting rather cumbersome. Overall, the game still looks solid with a great horror atmosphere, but elements like character models haven't aged well. The camera often leans in closer during major story moments, revealing a lack of detail on the facial expressions. Last but not least, the soundtrack follows many games in the early 2000s by going for some hard rock tracks. The legendary Trent Reznor was supposed to produce the music, but in the end his material was replaced with other elements. The end result succeeds at generating a rugged and gritty tone. When you push beyond the technical details, the biggest changes are revealed. Doom 3 plays like a cross between Half-Life, Resident Evil, and House of the Dead, taking elements from all three and merging them into a hodgepodge of different design components. First up is Half-Life. Valve's seminal series is revered for its seamless approach to storytelling and world building, keeping the player locked into one perspective at all times. Doom 3 blends this approach by allowing the player to explore the environment, have brief conversations with other characters, especially in the opening, and interact with other items like an arcade cabinet. However, the game does muddle the approach by shifting to cutscenes, which are often used to introduce a new enemy type, before putting you back in the first-person view. When the game came out, this worked well to emphasize the hideous enemies and how far the franchise had come, but for gameplay it can result in some stop-and-start pacing. Rather than constantly moving without interruption as you were in previous titles, Doom 3 orders you to halt while it shows off the finer details of its graphical engine. The inspiration from Resident Evil is obvious. This is a grim, moody and foreboding title with a major focus on dilapidated corridors and isolation. In the early missions you'll hear scientists and soldiers crying out in fear as the invasion takes hold, emphasizing that your character is all alone in a nightmarish situation. The near endless amounts of blood, viscera and hellish alterations covering the walls succeed at creating a hopeless setting with an undercurrent of misery. The fact that your player character doesn't speak was also a wise choice, allowing you to be fully immersed in the UAC base and beyond. Still, Doom 3 is much more focused on abrupt scares rather than creeping dread. This also applies to the boss fights, which are much more varied than the original titles. From the tight early encounter with a spider hybrid to the hulking rage of the Guardian, laying on the firepower isn't always the best path to success. The third foundation is House of the Dead. This popular arcade light gun shooter uses a simple yet effective template. Zombies pop out and you shoot them to rack up a high score. Doom 3 also draws from this, with creatures constantly leaping out and teleporting in from front and behind to surprise the player. This is especially true of the imps who lay on the jump scares after you open a door or cross into a new area. When playing the game years after its release, this stands out as the most repetitive and lackluster element. Backpedaling is a good idea to avoid getting knocked off target, but the number of times Doom 3 uses this feature can become annoying after a while. Again, it works well in the early going to show off how the enemies move, but you'll be tired of the continuous jump scares by the halfway mark. Most of the enemies like to get right up in your face, especially the imps, spiders, and lost souls who also hunt in packs. With these inspirations in mind, let's talk about the core action. Your movement speed has been heavily reduced, and the game now relies on the traditional right-handed view of FPS games. As a result, you'll slowly creep your way through each level, killing enemies as you go, and completing objectives in a mostly linear setup outside of the many locked doors. There are no completion percentages, secret areas, or par times. Instead, you can find a now common FPS collectible, audio logs. Though bafflingly, Doom 3 never added an option for in-game subtitles, even with the updated BFG Edition. The guns themselves perform their functions well enough, though the shaking and stagger effects ensure that you won't be blasting your way through like you did before. You can still carry every weapon at once, with the arsenal growing over the course of the campaign, but they do feel a bit underpowered. For starters, the sound of the plasma rifle is very lightweight, despite doing more damage than the base assault rifle. The standard shotgun can also feel imprecise. Other firearms like the rocket launcher aren't always viable in the tight corridors. You may find yourself taking some self-inflicted damage, which causes some conflict between the arsenal and the level design. Doom 3 wants to be a claustrophobic horror shooter, but this butts heads with the franchise's pedigree. The changes to pacing and tone result in a competent game, but one that isn't as satisfying to play as the first two. This also shows through the level design and other components. The map screen has been completely eliminated, and enemies fade away when they die, with some wacky ragdoll effects to boot. Unfortunately, this does negatively affect the navigation. With no way to tell which rooms you have already killed your way through, I found myself going round in circles on some occasions to find the right keycard or access code. Aside from ammo lockers and the aforementioned audio logs, there isn't much reason to explore, and the use of sentry bots on the Mars base can feel like the game taking over and playing itself for a bit. These little robots have unlimited health and ammo, while also auto-targeting your enemies as you follow them around the levels. Perhaps id Software wanted to experiment with friendly AI, but it does end up tipping the difficulty scales off balance. Generally, playing on normal is a very comfortable experience, with the enemies not doing much damage to the protagonist. Towards the end of the game, you'll find an artifact known as the Soul Cube, which can absorb the health of your enemies. Then enter Hell itself via teleportation, which looks like you're diving down the throat of a giant monster, another great effect. Once again, at the time of its release, few environments looked so unforgiving or brutal. The skull of a giant demon sitting in the lava sets the scene perfectly. The level design opens up a bit as you take on a wider range of foes at once, gradually inching your way towards the final encounter. Like every other horrifying sight in Hell, the cyber demon looks brilliant. It towers over both you and every other enemy, laying on the powerful energy blasts, though the fight itself is somewhat unimpressive. You run around a circular arena, killing smaller enemies to fill up the Soul Cube's power, then use it to damage the boss. Once defeated, your unnamed Space Marine is teleported back to the ruined facility as the sole survivor of the incident, being picked up by his comrades. However, we do see Betruger reincarnated as a dragon demon known as the Maledict. This forms the basis for Doom 3's expansion pack, Resurrection of Evil, which was produced by Nerve Software and released in 2005. 2 years after the events of the base game, you'll take control of another Marine Corporal, who is working for the UAC scientist Dr. Elizabeth McNeil. In the hidden depths of Mars, another portal is opened, and this time you have to take on Dr. Betruger directly. Early on, you'll pick up a new tool, the Grabber Gun. Essentially, it's the gravity gun from Half-Life 2, another element borrowed from that franchise. Throughout the expansion, it is mainly used to pick up enemy projectiles and throw them back, but outside of moments where the game demands it, I found it easier and quicker to just shoot the demons with regular weapons. This is another case of Doom 3 attempting to imitate other properties with a weaker execution. You also receive another cube artifact that can slow down time, but it isn't really worth using. Resurrection of Evil follows a similar template with another trek through Hell, culminating with the Maledict boss fight. As Betruger flies around and dumps fire on you, waiting for a clean shot with the rocket launcher or other weapons is your best bet. Taking him down closes the book on this version of Hell. The final piece of the Doom 3 experience is the Lost Mission, a set of 8 levels that were cut from the original game. It's easy to see why, as they are easily the weakest set pieces in the game, while also interfering with the base version's story. You play as another unnamed Marine who survives the slaughter of Bravo Team and crawls away into a duct. From here, it's your job to assist Dr. Richard Meyer and destroy an experimental teleportation array that could send the demons all the way to Earth. The places you'll fight through are extremely narrow and don't feature any new weapons or enemies. Even the final boss is just a repeat of one from the base game. While it was nice to include this extra content in the BFG Edition, it won't be leaving any lasting impact on the player. As a whole package, whether Doom 3 can still be enjoyed today will vary greatly depending on your preferences and willingness to accept a different style of gameplay. Those who have played and loved the newer games may find it stilted and cumbersome, while others may appreciate the attempt to craft a more horrific, blood-soaked atmosphere, one that would go on to inspire the likes of Dead Space and the Callisto Protocol years later. It was arguably the id Tech 4 engine that stood out more than Doom 3 itself, going on to be used in other shooters like Prey, Quake 4 and Enemy Territory. For me, the third Doom is the awkward middle child of the franchise, caught up between following other IPs and staying true to itself. Not a bad game, but easily the weakest entry in the series. This polarised reaction would send the series underground for over a decade, but it did end up on the big screen with a film adaptation in 2005, directed by Andrzej Bartkowiak. Starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Carl Urban and Rosamund Pike, it bombed both critically and commercially, with the actors later expressing regret over the production. Doom's basic story was never going to translate well to cinema or heavy cinematics. This would be a major lesson learned for the franchise's eventual comeback. Towards the end of the 2000s, id Software went quiet for gaming releases. The company was acquired by Zenimax Media in 2009, which eventually connected them to Bethesda Softworks. Doom would maintain a lighter presence on mobile platforms with the release of several spin-offs. Doom RPG, Doom 2 RPG, and Doom Resurrection were developed by different studios to keep things humming along. Doom 4 had been in development since 2008, and the plan was to follow in the footsteps of other popular franchises while putting a new spin on Doom 2. But id Software would completely scrap the title and start over in 2011, resulting in another protracted development cycle. As the 2010s kicked off, id started another FPS franchise, Rage, which was met with mixed reviews. This also prompted the team to reconsider their approach. Meanwhile, their other IPs were handed out and went in new directions. Wolfenstein: The New Order, developed by Machine Games in 2014, marked a new beginning for the franchise with a great story and a campaign that started to pull players back in. 2 years later, it was Doom's turn to make the same jump into modern gaming, running on the id Tech 6 game engine. The FPS genre had changed dramatically over 12 years, with modern military shooters dominating the gaming landscape. Call of Duty, Battlefield, the Medal of Honor reboot and their imitators were locked in a fierce battle to win over the masses, but this also resulted in many repetitive cookie-cutter design templates. Stop and pop cover shooting, regenerative health, linear set pieces and a short single-player campaign with greater focus on the multiplayer. When compared with these efforts, the modern reboot of Doom was aggressively original. It didn't care what the rest of the FPS market was doing, nor did it feel the need to cater to as wide an audience as possible. It stands tall, and in doing so, ranks as one of the best games not just in 2016, but arguably the entire decade. We start again from the beginning with a demonic invasion of Mars triggered by the UAC's corrupt experiment with Argent Energy. The corporation is led by the hulking robot Samuel Hayden, with some consultation from Dr. Olivia Pierce. The latter has developed an obsession with hell, and the two characters pop up at specific intervals throughout the campaign. The story has been heavily de-emphasized, and right from the word go, this is easily the best opening in the entire series. The soundtrack is building up and pounding in your ears. Unlike other shooters of the time, it gets you super pumped to play, and stamps itself onto the scene. Doom 2016 does have a multiplayer mode developed by Certain Affinity and Escalation Studios, who also designed the Snap Map mode for additional customization. But this title is first and foremost a single-player experience, something that had been missing from the FPS genre for many years. Yet it also remembers what made the franchise so memorable to begin with, and puts gameplay first. The Doomslayer himself is shrouded in mythical darkness, and this begins as soon as he breaks out of his coffin. You get the sense that this unstoppable juggernaut is a creation of hell itself. But it doesn't stop there. The developers do a brilliant job of showing his character through actions rather than words, as well as environmental storytelling. All of this unfolds while rarely pausing or taking control away from the player. Even the pickup and death animations are laced with some goofy personality. The protagonist angrily smashes a computer screen to start the game, wrecks expensive equipment despite the protests of other characters, and brutally executes any demon that gets in his way. Much like the game itself, this ultra-violent beast doesn't give a damn about the UAC, their experiments into energy, or the wider implications for humankind. He's just here to kill, and this approach allows the player to jump straight into the action without any delays or distractions. And what a thrill ride this is! The new Doom is about one thing and one thing only: rip and tear until the job is done. The formula has returned to the classic titles, with fast movement, no reloading, and a relentless flow of badass carnage. Picking up the pistol, an armoured suit and a shotgun, the game lets you know immediately to go on the offensive. Zombies and imps are the opening enemies, with brief introductions that never last more than a few seconds. Running and jumping around the environment is an absolute breeze, with quick clambering animations and cathartic context-sensitive moments, like ripping out the heart of a gore nest to prevent more demons from spawning. The rhythm and pace of play is exhilarating, with two main rules to follow: if you stop moving, you're dead; if they move, kill them. To facilitate this, several key components have been implemented, most notably the glory kill system. When an enemy is close to death, they'll flash blue and orange. This is your cue to close the gap and melee them for a gory execution that refills some of your health in the process. There's an unbelievable amount of detail, with every enemy having their own unique animations that change depending on the angle. On the other side of the coin, we have the chainsaw, which not only feels as gruesome as it did before, but also refills your ammo. This encourages you to attack with everything you've got, with the arsenal also being a real standout. The weapons you get to use are so much better than Doom 3, with the developers going the extra mile to offer alternate fire modes and upgrades that really improve their overall utility. The base shotgun is already crunchy enough, but how does a triple shot or explosive shell sound? You can get the upgrades by hunting for these flying robots around the levels, and can then swap between them at will with a push of the R key. Every firearm has a defined use and feels very distinctive, rather than being split between hit scan and projectiles. The plasma gun with its rapid fire and energy pulse is already satisfying, but the armaments get even better as you go through the levels. One of my personal favourites is the Gauss cannon, which packs a huge punch from long range and also offers a charge-up scope that can annihilate some of the stronger enemies. The chain gun is another awesome gun, with a mobile turret feature that dishes out a ludicrous amount of damage. There are no fluff weapons or moments where you feel one gun isn't effective. All of them are perfectly in tune with the action. Outside of the weapons, you'll also come across Argent energy cells that offer permanent increases to your health, ammo and armor. Even your Praetor suit is now upgradable with additional benefits to reduce environmental damage, lower cooldowns for grenades, and make power-ups last longer. Your enemies are ruthless and brutal as well, but the main difference in Doom 2016 is how effortlessly they move around the environment and pursue the player. Jump scares and basic AI are out, and intelligent movement is in. Every demon is able to climb and jump around to keep up with the protagonist, another way to push for offensive moves at all costs. They also have their own unique attacks and behaviours, with the hulking Hell Knights always charging at you, the Mancubus laying on some heavy firepower, and a chunky close-range ground slam. The Kaka demons can both attack from range and get up close for a bite, and the Pinkies are introduced late in the game, but their charge attack can be very dangerous if you don't get to their weak points round the back. Other returning foes like the Revenant and Baron of Hell are very threatening, but taking them down with a glory kill never gets old. All of the demons look better than ever thanks to the upgraded tech, and are also easily identifiable. Listening to their distinctive screams as they enter combat is important, as it allows you to prioritise the deadliest foes. Along the way, the graphics and sound are truly mind-blowing, fully immersing you in the title. Doom 2016 makes full use of the developer's talents with an angry orange glow that hangs over the entire experience. The lighting is outstanding and isn't there just to show off the engine. The Mars Foundry really stands out in the early going, with other vibrant blue and green colours that make the arsenal come alive. Hell itself feels unforgiving and nasty, with more medieval iconography entering the scene. The levels themselves are far removed from linear hallways. Combat encounters often take place in wide arenas, and you'll have to platform across gaps with an agile double jump at many moments. Unlike its predecessor, however, you'll never get lost in this game, with clear objective markers and a brilliant map system that lays out all floors and passageways in a three-dimensional view. The act of finding keys and other items necessary to progress is just as engaging as the rest of the package. What can I say about Mick Gordon's music that hasn't already been said? It's an incredible set of heavy metal tracks that works the same way the original game did. The soundtrack rises and falls with every combat encounter, while always conveying a great sense of build-up. It always heightens the sense of thunderous power bestowed on the player. On top of all this, the Doom reboot features many structural and design changes that go hand in hand with the gameplay. For starters, the game telegraphs every combat encounter with icons in the top right corner. Giving you a sense of progress through the level is one thing, but how about offering weapon upgrade points as a reward for eliminating every foe? At every turn, the game is pushing you towards destroying the ugly invaders. The power-ups are back for more difficult sections, and this time they feel even more satisfying to use. Berserk is the most sadistic of the bunch, with the Doomslayer ripping every enemy apart with his power-armoured hands. We also have invulnerability, quad damage, and haste, which are all incredibly helpful on higher difficulties. In terms of balance and fun factor, Doom 2016 is both well accommodating to newcomers and fair to those who have mastered the rapid-fire action. There aren't any par-times or rewards for speedrunning, but we do get the infamous Ultra Nightmare mode, which challenges you to make it all the way through the title without dying once. It's a massive undertaking that really ups the overall skill ceiling. On this rollercoaster ride in and out of hell, the game also encourages you to do some exploring, with a full suite of secrets, unlockables and side tangents. This isn't your throwaway campaign where you play it once, grab a couple of insignificant audio logs and move on. No, id Software wanted players to come back again and again, and they succeeded with flying colours. In hidden nooks and crannies, you can find Doom action figures, additional upgrades for your weapons and equipment, and even a few side tangents like these time challenges that take place in different dimensions. There's a ludicrous amount of content here that begs you to replay. Every level ends with a summary of your collectibles and allows you to easily pick things up later with the save and exit button. Last but not least, we have the secret levels, an awesome tribute to the franchise's roots. You can find a hidden lever in each level that opens a nearby door. Head through it and you'll find yourself in a recreation of classic levels from the original Doom, complete with flat textures. Much like Wolfenstein The New Order before it, Doom 2016 knows where it came from and takes steps to pour in some fan service. It's a rare game where every last little detail is in service to both fun and rewarding the player for their skills. Every single misstep from Doom 3 has been corrected and smoothed over to a mirror shine. There may be an occasional moment where you miss a jump or the enemies get stuck on parts of the environment, but otherwise every element is absolutely stellar. Thanks to a near flawless gameplay formula, we also get an arcade mode, which adds even more replayability to the campaign. Ironically, it takes the same XP flashes seen in multiplayer shooters and applies them to a single player context. The surrounding plot is very basic, but this is very intentional. Interacting with characters is kept to a minimum, as the Doomslayer eventually tracks down a powerful device known as the Crucible, with help from an artificial intelligence named Vega. Of course, when you reach the last of the 13 levels, boss fights enter the fray. Each one is fast-paced, varied and exciting. The Cyber Demon is especially menacing, and it appears to be a mutated version of the Doomslayer himself, with a similar set of corroded armour. You still need to blast away until its health bar hits 0, but the creature has a flurry of attacks that keep you on the move. This fight keeps things balanced with some health drops every so often. Further down the line, the Hell Guards mark the first tag team boss fight in the series. Taking place in a wide circular arena, this set piece will really test your skills as you focus fire on one while avoiding attacks from the other. Finally, there's the Spider Demon, which takes the Doomslayer to a blood-soaked pit with a ton of different attacks to boot. I love how the monster gradually gets weaker as you whittle down its health. To cap things off, you jam the BFG down the spider's throat and pull the trigger. What a way to go out. With the source of the demonic threat eliminated, the story ends rather predictably. Samuel Hayden snatches the Crucible and teleports the Doomslayer away to an unknown location. This lightweight conclusion hardly matters. Doom 2016 remains a phenomenal title, one that revitalized the franchise and left gamers begging for more. Following a few updates to the multiplayer, the sequel was unveiled just 2 years later at E3 2018. The most recent entry in the series to date, Doom Eternal, had a very firm foundation to work with. Just like Doom 2 Hell on Earth, the sequel aimed to broaden and refine the formula with a particular emphasis on challenge. The game arrived in early 2020, and at this point there wasn't much in the way of genre competition. The glut of modern military shooters was now yesterday's news, and many of the leading FPS franchises had fallen on the wrong side of critical reception. Call of Duty was long in the tooth despite the well-received Modern Warfare reboot, Battlefield was slipping in the eyes of fans, and Halo Infinite was still in the pipeline. On the way to release, we were also treated to another live-action movie, Doom Annihilation, directed by Tony Giglio. It aimed to capture the look and feel of the 2016 reboot, but id Software wasn't involved in the production, and the reviews were once again mixed. Running on the id Tech 7 engine, Eternal goes for a more arcade style of gameplay, piling on the refinement and blending them with the older style of the franchise. It was very well received and was also a handy product during the pandemic lockdowns, but some regard it as slightly weaker than the 2016 reboot in several ways. Picking up right where the last game left off, Doom Eternal is a new take on the demonic invasion of Earth. Spearheaded by 3 Hell Priests and a powerful deity known as the Khan Maker, at least 60% of the population has been wiped out with the help of the traitorous UAC Corporation. The Doomslayer is back to wage a one-man war against the Legions, but this time many changes have been made to both the story and overall presentation. You'll notice a time jump between games, and the fact that Dr. Samuel Hayden is nowhere to be seen, later relegated to an AI voice in the player's head. Next, the game relies on a number of different environmental designs that lean much more towards fantasy than straightforward sci-fi. Finally, the storytelling techniques have been drastically altered, with more gameplay pop-ups and cutscenes that dive much deeper into the world and characters. Having so much extra information, including a ton of codex entries after the previous game kept things simple, was a bit jarring for me. On the one hand, it can be interesting to read about the wider world and learn more about every enemy and character, but on the other, it does slow down the pace at many points. You're blazing through, kicking the asses of every enemy you meet, and then the game tells you to hold up for a moment. Still, you can skip these scenes if you want, and Doom Eternal never forces the wider narrative down your throat. The gameplay loop is still placed front and centre. Doom 2016 offered a near unstoppable sense of speed and ferocity that never wavered. Eternal tempers that power fantasy by offering a more unforgiving gameplay loop. This is immediately apparent as enemies are more aggressive and damaging. Foes like the Mancubus, Hell Knight and Revenant are thrown at you early on. Being at close range is now more risky as the enemies can bunch up and all attack you at once. Staying on the move has never been more important, though the protagonist is now much more agile, able to swing from poles and climb walls, which adds more platforming to the levels. His weapons remain on top form with some minor changes. The Gauss Cannon is now the Ballista, with an alternative fire mode that launches a wider wave of energy to cut down multiple opponents. The Super Shotgun now comes with a grappling hook, allowing you to get up close to deliver maximum punishment. Longtime fans will notice that some of the firearms, most notably the plasma rifle, resemble their classic counterparts, while still being able to dish out the damage. New tools and abilities also play a major role, with the Doomslayer now boasting a Predator-style wrist blade for the returning glory kills, a charged-up blood punch, a dash system that aids in traversal, and a shoulder-mounted grenade launcher and flamethrower. The last 3 of these operate on cooldown timers, with each now being a core feature of the action. Take the chainsaw for example. It was a helpful tool in the previous game, though generally there was always enough ammo to make it through each encounter. But in Doom Eternal, it's a requirement. If you run out of supplies with multiple heavy demons bearing down on you, you're in serious trouble, as cutting up the stronger enemies takes more fuel that now spawns in rarer quantities. That's why the sequel places so many fodder enemies in the levels. You're meant to cleave through them and grab the refills with the 1 bit of fuel that always regenerates. The glory kills still give back health, but the flame belch is used to top up your armor for some added protection. Armor deteriorates very quickly, but luckily the title has some breaks in between fights where you can easily kill weaker enemies to rebuild it. The demons of Doom Eternal demand a lot from the player, with a clear split between light, heavy and super heavy. Many of the latter are close-range powerhouses designed to chase you down and never stop attacking. The Dread Knight and Baron of Hell now feature twin blades and endlessly pursue the player, while other enemies harass the Slayer in other ways. The Whiplash is a real slippery one who moves fast and unleashes energy blasts that knock you back, and the Carcass puts up annoying shields that can briefly block your attacks. The Mancubus, especially the cyber versions, can take a lot of punishment before going down. Further on, the Archvile makes a fiery return and must be taken out quickly, or he'll end up summoning other demons to make your job harder. The Tyrant is essentially a mini cyber demon that stands in place and unleashes some heavy firepower. At times there are so many foes on screen that you may end up getting boxed in like I did on several occasions. On top of all that, the use of demon totems and marked enemies that have killed other players increase their power even more. This is certainly one of the biggest onslaughts ever thrown at FPS fans, both past and present, but there are a couple of curveballs thrown your way, namely the weak points. The returning Arachnotron has a turret that can be blown off, and the Caca demon can be taken out quickly by shooting a grenade into its mouth, leaving it wide open for an easy glory kill. But it doesn't stop there. Doom Eternal is far from a basic sequel, as the levels are now packed with many more secrets and hidden items. Some of these are for decoration, and others expand and develop the protagonist. Breaking a wall here or taking a leap of faith there will often yield many rewards. The Praetor suit upgrades are now split into multiple types on a radial grid. Searching the levels for these ghostly knights allows for many improvements, while also hinting at the Doomslayer's past. You can also find these power cells that can be used outside the levels, alongside runes that offer lighter benefits, like faster glory kills and some bullet time in mid-air that allows you to aim more precisely. Secret combat encounters can be triggered by gore nests for some added weapon upgrade points, and the game also takes you to other dimensions for some highly challenging sequences. By finding a nearby key and opening these purple doors, you can access Slayer gates for a standalone encounter. Complete these without dying and you'll receive Empiron keys to unlock a new wonder weapon, the Rapid Fire Unmaker. Late in the title, the Crucible is also available for use, allowing you to slice up every demon with one swing, so long as you can find the energy to charge it up. All of these new elements combine to deliver a higher amount of tension, something the 2016 game mainly offered on higher difficulties. I played through Eternal on normal and often survived encounters by the skin of my teeth. It's certainly not easy for new players, who should definitely play the previous release before jumping into this one. To counteract this increase in difficulty, Doom Eternal offers extra lives that instantly refill your health when it hits 0. You'll have to make use of these sparingly, as there are only so many to pick up in each level. Of course, the upside to this focus is the way skilled players are thoroughly rewarded. Making full use of the game's mechanics to move at top speed, rapidly swapping between the weapons, and thinning out the enemy numbers results in some very impressive feats, many of which have been uploaded to YouTube. Of course, Doom Eternal looks just as brilliant as its predecessor. The switch to sci-fi fantasy may catch you off guard, but the sheer variety of environments, including a frozen castle and the super gore nest, emphasize the demon's hold over our planet. At one point, even the BFG itself has been converted into a planet-destroying weapon, giving off a huge sense of scale that rivals the likes of God of War and other AAA exclusives. The enemy designs, especially the imps and possessed UAC soldiers, have been designed to look like the older games, while still taking advantage of the upgraded game engine. The sound design is equally impeccable, though unfortunately it was revealed that Mick Gordon hadn't been treated well for his efforts. id Software put him under a lot of pressure to deliver the soundtrack on time, and this came at a bad moment when the composer was moving studios and equipment. This eventually led him to quit future projects. The YouTuber Mild Conviction has a full breakdown of what went wrong, but the end result for Doom Eternal is another strong track list. The most iconic effort by far is The Only Thing They Fear Is You, which kicks in whenever you take on a boss. The campaign is tied together by the Fortress of Doom, a central space station for you to access levels and use power cells to unlock various items. This is the first time a Doom game has experimented with a structure beyond linear progression, and it ends up being surprisingly addictive. Watching your collection of albums and action figures grow over time is very rewarding, and so too is opening the locked sections to claim those helpful upgrades. This makes Eternal the most feature-rich entry in the series, even including some cheat codes to honour the franchise's roots. When you do enter the portal to the levels, you'll quickly discover a higher amount of platforming. By climbing walls and launching himself across gaps, the Doomslayer does a lot more than simply running through corridors, though this isn't always for the best. Swimming and making use of radiation suits can be a bit fiddly at times, while also slowing down the pacing. The underwater dash is helpful, but this part of the game lacks the same sense of speed. Initially, the boss fights begin with the Doom Hunter, a mechanised hybrid with a shield that requires the plasma rifle to take out, but when you reach the halfway mark, the 5th mainline Doom introduces another, new controversial foe. The Marauder is a deadly nemesis who jumps in to ruin your day, much like Mr. X from Resident Evil. He attacks at a very fast speed with his Argent Energy Axe, sends out a Spirit Dog to slow down the Slayer's movement, and worst of all, constantly puts up a shield that can block all your attacks. Some reviewers felt he was very frustrating to fight and disrupted the flow of combat, but I disagree. I'm not a high-level Doom Eternal player, but once I got the green flash and sound pattern down, I laid on multiple attacks and kept repeating the process until the Marauder was dead. He's a spanner in the works, the mirror image of the Doomslayer himself, and when it comes to testing the player, this is perhaps the most impactful addition that continues to appear throughout the game. You can choose to focus on him immediately, or take out other foes first to leave him as the primary target. At specific points, the story of Doom Eternal lays on some further details through flashbacks, and this allows the Slayer to be fleshed out further. There's a history behind his limitless violence, and the biggest example is Sentinel Prime, a shorter level which takes you through a temple before culminating with the Gladiator boss fight. The Slayer's brutal tendencies are still present and accounted for via his interactions with other characters. He doesn't say a word to the grovelling Hell Priests before executing them, and at other points the protagonist manhandles some puny human survivors on the way to the next level. In other ways, Eternal can feel like too much, not for the core campaign and gameplay, but for what surrounds it. id Software felt the need to add in a load of unlockable skins and constant updates in the main menu. It's not a massive issue, but this stream of fluff items can feel disruptive when the 2016 release was so committed to delivering an unfiltered experience. Other modes do fare better. The master levels have returned for another round of ultra difficult gameplay, and the Horde mode is recommended only to players who have beaten both the main campaign and the expansions. It's an updated version of the arcade mode with more score counters and multipliers. As the ultimate climax comes to fruition, Doom Eternal takes further steps to set itself apart from previous efforts. We go on another jaunt through hell, which takes us through the grisly process of harvesting human souls. As opposed to the tight corridors of the original, Eternal features enormous buildings that tower over the player when they first enter the realm. Beyond this, the Doomslayer heads to the Khanmaker's homeworld. It stands at a stark contrast with towering silver structures that look more angelic than any other setting. Flying through floating rings and taking on the Maker's subordinates for some extra ammo drops, we finally reach the boss herself. At first you'll need to dodge ranged attacks, and after that it's a literal game of the floor is lava. Using the super shotgun to grapple up and deliver a blood punch to the boss's face is the best part of the fight. Do this several times and the Maker is out of the game. From here you'll blast back to Earth for a showdown with another returning face. The Icon of Sin is a huge upgrade from Doom 2, transforming from a face on the wall to a Godzilla-sized giant. It did remind me of the Human Reaper fight from Mass Effect 2 while playing. Chasing the giant down through the ruined city is a great set piece, and when you meet face to face it's a two-part encounter. Shooting up the 8 body parts while tougher enemies gradually spawn in makes for a very fitting final battle, with the Doomslayer plunging the Crucible sword into its head to finish the game. The invasion of Earth has been stopped, but the Slayer's actions have triggered some further instability between dimensions. This forms the basis for another franchise debut, DLC expansions. The Ancient Gods continues from the main game with a shorter outing split into 2 parts. The first was released in October 2020 and the second in March 2021. The DLC starts the Doomslayer off with all weapons and upgrades already acquired, but you can find some additional support runes to balance things out. Initially, you'll fight your way across a giant oil rig, UAC Atlantica, which features many tough fights alongside a brief dive beneath the waves. After that, it's a jaunt through the blood swamps to retrieve the Father's life sphere. There are a few basic cutscenes with more human survivors in between, but the 4 levels do a good job of picking up from the base campaign. There are also 2 boss fights which both rely heavily on multitasking. In the swamps, the Trial of Malagog is a set of floating cubes that must be knocked into the centre of the arena. Then the Summer Maker is a tough and often annoying boss to close out the first half of the DLC. Having to fight the creature alongside 2 summoned demons buffed by spirits that require the plasma rifle's alternate fire is a pain, but the second part of the fight features multiple platforms and a respawning Bloodmaker that constantly gets in your way. It will certainly push players to the limit, especially on ultra-violence difficulty or higher. Believe it or not, the Ancient Gods Part 2 introduces another round of new enemy types and buffs, beginning with the Stone Imps. These guys like to roll around and bash into the Slayer, with the rapid-fire shotgun being the best way to defeat them. You've also got the Poison Teleporters who can sap the Slayer's health until they're taken out. The Armoured Barons require speed to defeat, as you only have a limited window before their armour regenerates. To counteract these threats, the Ancient Gods bestows you with a new Argent weapon, a powerful warhammer that can knock enemies into a daze and refill your ammo. It's another awesome flourish to slam down into a group of demons, leaving them vulnerable to your other attacks. I didn't expect a grand climax in the same vein as Star Wars and Avengers Endgame, but the Ancient Gods embraces it with a brief cutscene that shows the armies of humanity and hell going to battle. There isn't much build-up to this outcome, but it still maintains the gargantuan scale. One of the toughest fights comes after a bit of platforming, where 2 marauders, buffed by the demon spirits, are thrown at you. They quickly took away the extra lives I had built up, but eventually I made it through. The final boss is the Dark Lord, an evil version of the Doomslayer clad in a crimson-red power suit. Much like the Marauder, you have to wait for the green flash to stun him first, which can also be extended by the hammer. Only then can you slowly whittle away his health bar. The main difference here is how the Dark Lord can regain his health every time he hits you with his sword or shield charge. This creates a dynamic where you have to stay within mid-range to trigger the green flash, but not so close that he can land a strike. It gets really challenging by the end when he starts summoning demons, but with enough effort you will prevail. As the Dark Lord is killed, the Slayer utters his only spoken word in the franchise, triggering the immediate death of all demons across all worlds. Doom Eternal's DLC had some mixed views from fans, especially for the second half, but it still succeeds at pushing the action just a little further with another dose of challenge and some extra enemies that require more specific approaches. The only question was, where do you go after killing the franchise's version of Satan? As the Doomslayer is once again sealed away in a tomb until the world needs him again, this rendition of the franchise appears to have reached its narrative conclusion. But the IP is now more valuable and popular than ever. When you look at the dozens upon dozens of FPS titles today, it becomes clear that none of them would exist without the original Doom 30 years ago. After setting the rules for the genre, the franchise went from a pioneer to an imitator and back again, finding itself at different places within the gaming industry. id Software has evolved with it as the original creators moved on to new ventures and handed Doom over to up-and-coming colleagues. When looking back at Doom 3 and the original concepts for Doom 4, you can't help but wonder what could have happened to the series. It may have blended in with countless other throwaway titles that attempted to take the crown off of Call of Duty, but instead id bucked the trend and resurrected their flagship IP, reaching the top of the genre once again. For the most part, Doom is fully deserving of its acclaim, delivering both technical advancements and a firm focus on enjoyable gameplay. It shows no sign of slowing down. In June 2024, Doom the Dark Ages was announced. It's a prequel that will dive deeper into the Doomslayer's past with a full-on medieval aesthetic. If this entry is anything like previous efforts, we'll be in for another top-tier thrill ride. Thanks for watching.